everybody, my name's Steve Schnee, and welcome to We're All Elvis. Essentially, We're All Elvis is me talking about my thoughts on Elvis Presley. I may have a top 10 list of his movie songs or a top 10 list of his Memphis recordings, but basically it's just going to be me sharing my love of Elvis and his music with you. Now, I may not share the same opinions as you, but I hope that you respect mine just as much as I respect yours. I'll be making these shows sporadically over time and sharing my thoughts and feelings about Elvis with you, as well as my collection of Elvis music. I hope that you enjoy this series, because you and me, we're alike, because we're all Elvis. Hi everybody, thanks for tuning into this episode of We're All Elvis. About 8 to 10 years ago, I wrote a blog post, and I basically laid out Elvis's career in 7 different phases. Instead of making you read that blog post, why don't I read it for you? And I created maybe an audio book of sorts, and it's only about maybe 10 minutes from beginning to end, but I decided to break it up into 2 parts. This episode is going to feature the first 4 phases of Elvis's career. Now, you may disagree or you may agree, but this is just my observation, and I use it sort of as a fun exercise in writing, and also maybe to introduce somebody who's just learning about Elvis and breaking down his career into 7 different phases. So that's what I've done on this episode. You get to hear the first 4 phases, and on the next episode, you're going to be able to hear the final 3. So sit back, relax, and enjoy, and I hope you like this. And thank you for tuning in to We're All Elvis. Phase 1, The King of Rockabilly, 1953 to 55. From his very first recordings in 1953 until he signed with RCA Records, Elvis was primarily known as a country and hillbilly performer, a genre that is now commonly referred to as rockabilly. His sides for Sun Records are legendary and are now acknowledged as early rock and roll, but when he was signed to the label, he was sold as a hillbilly artist, and he was quite successful at it too. During the first year or 2 of his professional career, this wiggling slab of talent honed his skills on the road, building up a fan base and receiving plenty of attention from the press. This may have been before he hit the big time, but this period was crucial in turning Elvis into the artist that he became when worldwide fame came calling. When RCA bought his contract from Sun Records, his style didn't change that much, but the production on Elvis's records moved away from the raw, rootsy feel of the Sun sessions towards a more refined but no less energetic sound. This slight shift in direction earned him his legit nickname. Phase 2, The King of Rock and Roll, 1956 to 59. Beginning with his first RCA single, Heartbreak Hotel, in January of 1956, Elvis went from being an up-and-coming hillbilly country artist to rock and roll's first real superstar. When people refer to him being the King of Rock and Roll, this is the period they're talking about. It was a period that lasted a little less than 5 years, but it changed the course of music. I mean, everyone knows Hound Dog, Don't Be Cruel, Blue Suede Shoes, etc. And although he never toured overseas, his records were enormous hits in every corner of the world. Elvis was unique. Elvis was different. The kids loved his look and sound, but the adults found him offensive, just as it should be in rock and roll. However, Elvis was humble and down to earth, and that came through during his TV performances, which caught the attention of viewers of all ages. Whether he was loved or hated didn't matter. He was selling records and influencing a new generation. He made some movies, Love Me Tender, Loving You, Jailhouse Rock, and King Creole, and was drafted into the U.S. Army and spent the last 2 years of the decade overseas in Germany, yet his popularity never waned. Elvis seemed unstoppable. Phase 3, The Homecoming King, 1960. When Elvis was discharged from the Army in 1960, he received a hero's welcome. The press went wild. Frank Sinatra hosted a TV special in his honor, and he was thrust back into the studio to pick up where he left off. Plans were also put in place to resume his movie career. However, something was different. While Elvis had been away in Germany, rock and roll had become an accepted form of musical expression, so he was no longer considered dangerous or controversial. And in those 2 years, Elvis had lost his mother and had matured, leaving his primal rock and roll instincts behind and embracing a sound that was deeper and more meaningful to him. Yes, it was still rock and roll, but it was more controlled, more thoughtful, and more emotional. He was singing better than ever, and the gospel and country that he loved growing up began informing the music that he made. Elvis shaped a new sound for himself and set his sights on growing as an artist, as an actor, and as a human being. Phase 4, King of the B-Movie Musicals, 1961 to 67. Elvis made 2 films in 1960 alongside his Elvis Is Back album, but it wasn't until 61 that his focus shifted away from the studio and onto the silver screen. That year, Blue Hawaii was released, and it was a turning point for Elvis. The hit movie helped the soundtrack shift millions of units around the world and convinced everyone that his movies were better at promoting his albums than his concert tours were. So apart from one benefit show, Elvis did not play in front of a live audience again until 1968. In the meantime, he recorded a lot of soundtrack music, made a lot of movies, and sporadically recorded non-soundtrack sides that would be released between films. This was the period of time that most critics consider his first downfall. The truth is, a lot of the soundtrack recordings were lightweight and often embarrassing, but Elvis always made it sound great. It was obvious at times that his heart was not in it, and he may have seemed like he was sleepwalking through many of the songs, but there are some absolute gems that made it all worthwhile. A lot of people forget that Return to Sender and Can't Help Falling in Love, 2 of his most familiar 60s hits, were from soundtracks. Other top-notch tunes include Come On Everybody, I Got Lucky, I'll Take Love, Viva Las Vegas, King of the Whole Wide World, many more. They may not have been on the same level as his 50s hits, but they were recorded under different circumstances and in a very different time. There are real gems to be found during this phase in his career, although you do have to have a little bit of patience and get past songs like Do the Vega and Old MacDonald. Remember this, though. Elvis cut some amazing non-soundtrack recordings during this time, and the power in those cannot be denied. But alas, the studio became his part-time job, and movies became his full-time job. Well, that's it for this episode of We're All Elvis. Remember to tune into the next episode where you're going to be able to hear phases 5, 6, and 7. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and to ring that bell for future notifications. And until the next time, my name is Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie.